Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our annual reconciliation lecture. I'd like to call on Colin Hunter to welcome us to country. Thank you very much, Colin.
Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome. It is my honour and privilege to be here tonight. My name is Colin Hunter IV. I would like to start off by acknowledging that this evening we are on Wurundjeri country, home of my ancestors and also home to everybody here today. I wish to pay my respects to both elders past, present and emerging, elders from all nations, especially all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander community members joining us here tonight. Wurundjeri is a part of the Kulin Nation and of the Wurrung language group. Wurundjeri country extends from the inner city of Melbourne, across to the Great Dividing Range, west to the Werribee River, south to the Mordialloc Creek and east to Mount Baw. A big thank you to everybody who has helped make this event possible this evening. Woman Jekka, welcome, and I hope everybody has a fantastic night ahead. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin. I'd now like to call on our Vice-Chancellor and President, Professor Pascal Kester, to make a few opening remarks. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone, and isn't that great to see Uncle Colin the third or the fourth and demonstrating what it is that universities are all about, this transfer of knowledge and experience and wisdom from one generation to the next. I really could not be starting a better discussion as what we have tonight. And I'm really thrilled that we were able to be welcomed to country by Colin. I too would like to acknowledge that we meet today on the land of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, a land where on this campus, as well as our other two eastern campuses in Croydon and Wantona, learning and teaching and research has occurred for thousands of years. So we are just here continuing in that very proud tradition, and particularly tonight as we talk about reconciliation, is a very important thing for us to remember. I do pay my respect to elders past and present and to all Indigenous people who are here today, and especially our courageous and inspiring First Nations colleague here at Swinburne. It is my great pleasure to welcome you to what has become quite a tradition, which is a reconciliation lecture, where we gather around every year to really think deeply about what we have achieved and perhaps also reflect on what we have not yet achieved and focus on what it is that we can do in order to progress on this agenda of reconciliation. I'm particularly pleased also to acknowledge that we have Ian Ham with us, the chair of Swinburne Indigenous Governance Committee. And while he complains about the cold, he always knows that he's warmly welcome here and that we really want to have him feel that this is his campus as well. I'm delighted to welcome Melinda Cilento as our keynote speaker this evening. I know how tricky it was for her to fit this in, so we are hugely grateful for the time that she has allocated to us. As the CEO of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, but also previously the co-chair of Reconciliation Australia, Melinda has witnessed how reconciliation has been shaped across Australia. And Melinda, we certainly look forward to your reflections tonight. Now, at Swinburne, we have a strong and demonstrative commitment to actively drive reconciliation and to working with Indigenous communities to create positive impact. Less talking, more doing is always the bias at Swinburne. We endeavour to foster an environment where Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people feel culturally safe and where self-determination and Indigenous knowledges are embedded across our university. Since becoming the first university to achieve an Elevate RAP status in 2017 from Reconciliation Australia, Swinburne has laid a strong foundation for our work on reconciliation. Our range of practical, always very practical, this is Swinburne, practical initiatives have not only advanced reconciliation within our community, but we hope also reinforced our leadership of this very important area. Just a few examples of how we go about it. One of the big steps that we've taken over the past year was embedding reconciliation into the daily fabric of life at Swinburne through what we call the IBAPs, the Indigenous Business Action Plans. What it means is that those plans are self-led in each of our schools and division, ensuring that reconciliation is not just an aspirational goal that is discussed over there once every so often, but it is actually practical, action-driven priorities that are lived out every single day. Now, of course, the IBAP is not something that John Evans, our Indigenous leader, is proudly demonstrating in other universities, because we feel this is a rather special way in which we can show that we can really sort of help others on the way to reconciliation. Of course, a key priority for us has been improving inclusion and access to education for Indigenous students. In 2024, our Indigenous students' enrollment increased by nearly 12%, a very significant and encouraging step forward, even if it doesn't go far enough. We are a dual sector university, and therefore we are, I think, quite uniquely positioned to create a strong education to employment pathway for Indigenous Australian, and also for welcoming perhaps Indigenous students who don't feel that the university is for them. The vocational aspect is one where they can build their confidence, their aspirations, and we can kind of scaffold around them what it is that they need to go where it is that they want to go. And one exciting development has been the launch of the Mundani Vocational Centre of Excellence, which offers accredited training designed to equip Indigenous learners with practical skills and experience in high-demand sectors, such as the care economy, renewable energy, and construction. Now, building on Swinburne's strength as a university built on technology and innovation, we are also establishing the Indigenous Innovation and Enterprise Hub. As technology continues to create new opportunities for people to shape their own careers, this new hub will provide vital support for Indigenous entrepreneurs and enterprises, from skills development and business coaching to financing and networking capacity. And of course, innovation being at the heart of everything we do, we have thought about an Indigenous Building Co-Fabrication Centre, which is an innovative project that represents a transformative approach to construction, specifically for remote and regional areas. And we were talking about that with Melinda just before. Through this centre, we want to tackle the urgent need for safe, sustainable housing, particularly in Indigenous communities. It will use innovative community-led practices and construction technologies with a focus on local, self-determined home design and construction. In other words, getting the users to help in the design principle and then equipping the community so that they can build those themselves. Now, this year's theme for National Reconciliation Week is Bridging Now to Next, which really is absolutely right down to Swinburne's alley, because next-gen education and getting ready for the future is what we're really good at. It urges us to look to the future and keep striving for a more united and inclusive Australia. What great strides have been made in Australia's reconciliation journey. We also know that there have been some setbacks and disappointments. And that's why today, as much as at any other time, reconciliation really does matter. I'm very grateful to be part of a community like Swinburne, where we are taking meaningful steps towards lasting change. As we listen to Melinda's keynote tonight, I encourage you to think about how we might all embed reconciliation in our own lives. Enjoy the evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Pascal. I know that Pascal has already mentioned Melinda, but I'd just like to, in introducing Melinda, just extend a little bit on Pascal's already outlined. Melinda will be speaking tonight on reconciliation and her reflections on reconciliation and her views from nearly 2 decades of working in the reconciliation space. Melinda is Chief Executive of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia, a company director, an economist, and experienced senior executive. Melinda is the Deputy Chair of Australian Unity, Chair of the Expert Council on University Governance, and a member of the Ministerial Advisory Council on Skilled Migration. She is a member of Amplify Australia, the research committee, a member of the CCC Performance Consultative Committee and a Melbourne Institute Advisory Board member. Melinda was previously the Non-Executive Director of Woodside Petroleum, Co-Chair of Reconciliation Australia, a Commissioner with the Productivity Commission, Deputy CEO and Chief Economist with the Business Council of Australia, and held senior roles. Please join us in welcoming Melinda for her presentation tonight. Thank you very much, Melinda.
Thank you so much, John. Can I start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we're meeting, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. In doing so, I'd just like to pause and really reflect on what that means, and to ask each of you to really think about being in a place that has been inhabited by First Nations people for tens of thousands of years. As I rode my bike here, actually, I was reflecting on the area that we're in and the geography of the place and how that would have connected to the people who lived here well before us. Across the river, where the Wurundjeri would have spent many of their days through summer for obvious reasons, and then up the hill where I know people moved when the colder weather set in, sorry Ian, but to find shelter from the cold and to settle in for winter. And so I just think it's really important to actually not just say the words, but to really think about it and to try to remind yourself of what this place was like before those of us who are non-Indigenous inhabited it and built amazing buildings, but nonetheless on the land that has been others for forever. Can I also say, reference was made to the theme for Reconciliation Week. I just want to pause and actually talk a little bit about the language around, the use of the language about the bridge. I'm going to carbon date myself as someone who remembers 2000, 25 years ago today, when tens of thousands of people marched across the bridge in Sydney. A tremendous moment in Australia's history. A visual moment of momentum and support for reconciliation. 25 years ago. It's a generation for us to reflect on what's been achieved and what hasn't been achieved. And so really, again, as is every National Reconciliation Week, that theme is intended to connect with all of us as an opportunity to reflect on how we might contribute to reconciliation. Can I thank John Pollers, the Chancellor, and Pascal for inviting me in. It's always nice to see you here and to acknowledge all that you do in support of reconciliation. So it's lovely to have you in the audience, if not a little bit intimidating. The title of my talk, and I'm not quite sure how long I'm supposed to speak, so we'll see how that goes, and hopefully we'll take some questions. I am happy to take questions and reflect on what I've learned on the way through and hopefully share some insights. But the title of my talk was literally Reconciliation Reflections of a 20-Year Novice. And it's not meant to be cute or falsely humble, but I think is actually a pretty honest description of how I still see myself in the space. Actually, and I think it's the right lens through which I hope you hear my observations and take from them what you find useful. I want to share some perspectives on the topic that I know is important to you here at Swinburne, which is trying to understand reconciliation from both the Indigenous but also the non-Indigenous people's perspective and connections with it. And I will, of course, reference my experience with Reconciliation Australia and reconciliation action plans. I'm not going to do slides. It's not a PowerPoint presentation as such. What I'm hoping to do is actually speak really from my heart to yours about what I've learned on the way through. To do that, I thought I would just give you just a quick background on how I came to be in the reconciliation space and what 20 years looks like for someone who's as old as I am, and how it was that I came to be in the space at the stage in life when I did. In the mid-2000s, as was already mentioned, but I was the Chief Economist and Deputy CEO of the Business Council of Australia. It was a period of great prosperity for the nation, at least if you measured it on the sort of key macroeconomic aggregates that we like to use as measures of prosperity. But it was also one of increasing reflection for many of the members of the Business Council, who are literally the CEOs of the largest companies in Australia, reflections from them around the treatment of our First Nations people. And it was really interesting for me to hear so many CEOs who, of course, travelled overseas frequently, to hear them coming back to Australia and sort of remarking on how often they were challenged about Australia's First Nations experience and the way we were treating our First Nations peoples and communities. And it was really fascinating that this challenge was coming from them so overtly from overseas, and they were bringing it back and sort of saying, well, gosh, what should we be doing about this? We're a wealthy nation, and essentially what they were being told is, pull your socks up. What are you guys doing? And the irony of where our wealth was derived was certainly not lost on them. So the CEOs came back and they were sort of, at this stage, not all of them, but a good chunk of them looking for what we could do. We started to engage kind of quietly, I'd say, and it's interesting to sort of reflect on this, and we still have these conversations today around business sticking to its knitting and what business should be in or not be in. But because we didn't know what we didn't know, the BCA sort of warmed itself up into that. In 2006, Reconciliation Australia had developed its Reconciliation Action Plan program, and as kind of luck would have it, the president of the BCA at that time was Michael Chaney, and Michael and the then Prime Minister John Howard actually co-authored a letter to all BCA members encouraging them to take up reconciliation action plans. At the same, or very soon after, we had the 2007 election and Kevin Rudd was elected. And of course, subsequently, we had the Apology to the Stolen Generation and the initiation of the COAG Closing the Gap agenda. Now, the reason that those things are important is, from my perspective anyway, it gave business sort of permission to be in the space. They became very significant national issues and agendas, which almost legitimised the involvement of Australia's leading CEOs and Australia's leading businesses. And I took that opportunity to grab onto those agendas and to try to mark out some things that business could sustainably and consistently do in the space. That was, in essence, the beginning of my reconciliation journey. And that brought me right into the orbit of Reconciliation Australia. So if you think about that from 2006, just starting with the initiation of the Reconciliation Action Plan program, by 2010 I joined the board of RA and very soon after was appointed as the co-chair with a person who would become a dear friend in Professor Tom Calmer. The honest truth is, I knew next to nothing about reconciliation when I joined that board, like next to nothing. And how did that come to be? Well, I arrived in Australia at age 12 and quickly became the product of an education system that spent, quite frankly, too little time on history, full stop, and virtually no time on the history of our First Nations people and the impact of colonisation. My choices at university did nothing to change that, nor did my early work experience, to be honest. Fast forward to 2010, and what I can say is that what I had going for me was a desire to learn, to have a positive impact, and to leverage all of my BCA connections and resources to do what I could. I'm quite frankly glad that that was enough to earn the trust and support of those around me at Reconciliation Australia and among Indigenous elders, leaders and communities more broadly. Just pause on that for a second, because it was a real extension of trust and faith in someone who knew absolutely nothing. I cannot tell you how many times I've been humbled by the generosity and patience shown to me by so many people. I've been the beneficiary of so many stories, so many incredible experiences, a lot of humour, which is fantastic, a lot of laughter, but also a lot of pain, a lot of frustration, and appropriately a bit of anger on the way through, and more than a few tears. The privilege of these stories, of what I refer to as truth-telling for me, was to accelerate my understanding, and I feel that I owe an enormous debt of gratitude to Reconciliation Australia and everyone who's worked there for all that they've done to help me advance my learning and my understanding. While I still genuinely consider myself a novice, all of this has broadened and deepened the knowledge that I had, and these experiences have shaped the insights that I do want to share with you tonight. Let me start by saying the most obvious thing. The agenda of reconciliation remains as critical as ever for Australia. Without the full engagement of First Nations people in the life of this country, Australia is and will be forever diminished. Yet I feel we are still not taking reconciliation and First Nations rights and empowerment seriously. We still don't have adequate responses to the recommendations of the 1991 Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody, a very, very sad reminder of what is happening to this day. We've seen repeat findings on the failure to empower First Nations communities in the policies that are about them and which impact them, yet we still do not have proper tools for empowerment or for robust and transparent evaluation of these policies around which we spend millions and millions and millions of dollars. Their failure should not be laid at the feet of First Nations peoples and communities, but rather the people who continue to design them without proper empowerment. We fail to systematically identify and promote sources of First Nations strength and opportunity, and continue to see a perpetuation of false narratives around Indigenous spending and a failure to address the root causes of disadvantage, instead allowing the false dichotomy of the legacy of lifters and leaners and that narrative to persist. And we are not investing enough in reconciliation. That's a point that I will come back to. The second lesson that I wanted to reflect on, and this is going to seem like an obvious one, and to all of those Indigenous people here, I feel it is obvious, and I'm not trying to speak on your behalf, but to reflect something that I feel that I've learned. Reconciliation is hard work for First Nations people. It's really hard work, and I've come to appreciate that in ways that I never thought I would. And I feel that it's important that I say those things out loud. In an early board meeting, one of my Aboriginal board colleagues described the frequent criticism that they would be confronted with when they went to the pub on a Friday afternoon or evening. Having worked hard all week, having done the work of the RA board for free as a voluntary contribution, they would have their community friends and family give them a hard time for doing whitefellas work. I experienced the very raw emotion and just disillusionment and devastation in our Reconciliation Australia board meeting held in the immediate aftermath of the Juukan Gorge destruction by Rio Tinto. Rio was a long-standing Reconciliation Action Plan member that we thought was a genuine partner and supporter of reconciliation. I cannot possibly describe to you what that was like for me to sit in that room and experience that devastation. I was reminded of how hard reconciliation is when I had breakfast with a dear friend of mine just on the weekend. And she recounted her sadness that her mother, who's been a long-time advocate for reconciliation, won't get to see the progress that she deserves to, and her bitter disappointment in the shadow of the Voice referendum. It was even sadder yet for her to tell me that her daughter masks her Aboriginality now, having delivered an acknowledgement of country at a school and been subject to criticism and questioning about why she would even identify. This is the next gen that's already feeling the pressure of that. And of course, the devastation, disappointment and rejection that was felt profoundly through the Voice campaign, and through the campaign, and not just with the result, through the campaign. Disappointment that as a nation we did not decry the overt racism on display, and that as a nation we were not empathetic and trusting enough to adopt such a reasonable request that was gifted to us. Can I say that notwithstanding this soul-destroying disappointment, in the aftermath of the Voice result, not one member of the Reconciliation Australia board left the board. They all took time, they all grieved, and they all came back to continue rolling up their sleeves in the name of reconciliation. How are we going to change the trajectory of reconciliation? Well, based on my experience, I've got 4 things that I wanted to highlight. And first and foremost is that reconciliation will only succeed if non-Indigenous people start playing their part as genuine advocates and allies, essentially putting their respect on full display. This isn't about speaking for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This isn't about not empowering them. This is about actually leaning in and showing the respect that we have and making the case for why reconciliation matters to all of us so importantly. Now, let me just talk through a few things that I think really matter in this and a few ways that I would encourage all of us to do this. Firstly, we've seen all of the debate about acknowledgements of country and luckily, we seem to be moving away from the negativity around this. But for all of us who deliver an acknowledgement, can I encourage you to take the time to deliver an authentic acknowledgement of country? Take the time. Take the time to do it, and do it with respect and with authenticity and with sincerity. That's a demonstration of respect. Takes a bit of investment, takes a bit of courage. You might get something wrong, but I guarantee you that people are going to appreciate it and acknowledge it. We need to call out racism when we see it and when we hear it, always. Too often we expect the victims of racism to be the ones who graciously call it out, deal with it, and move on. We need to talk about reconciliation and why it matters to you, to your organisations, and we need to make it personal. And we need to advocate for and defend First Nations rights. We need to listen, hear, understand First Nations perspectives and priorities and take steps to empower them. One of the things we can do is ask people what they know about this nation's history. As I said, people have shared things with me and I've used that knowledge to challenge others. Asking people if they understand what a colour wheel is. Asking people if they understand when the stolen generations experience really finished in this country. How recently that was. Just 2 examples of things that I think people don't really talk enough about or really understand. The second point I wanted to make in terms of what needs to change is I think we need as many tools as possible to advance reconciliation in this country. Of course, I'm going to say that I'm a believer of reconciliation action plans, and I'm so delighted that Swinburne takes it as seriously as it does and is such a strong advocate for reconciliation action plans. It's really important that institutions like universities do that. During my time at RA, I really welcome feedback and indeed criticism of reconciliation action plans. This only helps to strengthen the RAP program and to find ways to use RAPs as a tool to lift engagement with reconciliation, to build understanding and to build awareness, and to ensure that these action plans actually deliver real outcomes, and that over time we lift the expectations so that more and more reconciliation action plans are about the aspirations of community and connection with community. I have seen firsthand how RAP organisations are being held to account for their commitments and for their actions, and when they fail those commitments. And that's been a real step up, and a step up that happened in my time on the board. And I have to say that I, against this background, really struggle when I hear calls for reconciliation action plans to be abandoned or when they're disparaged, quite frankly. I don't think reconciliation action plans have ever been positioned to be the only solution for advancing reconciliation, much less achieving reconciliation. They're one tool and one avenue of the many which we need to be pursuing. RAPs provide an entry point and a path often for non-Indigenous organisations and people to learn, to engage, to increasingly seek to impact reconciliation. And we need more of this. We need more doors opened into reconciliation, not fewer. The evidence shows clearly that RAP organisations are delivering fantastic outcomes, lifting their employment of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, increasing procurement, from First Nations businesses, and increasingly engaging with community to understand and empower them. One of the things that I've been really heartened by, and this is really why I think reconciliation action plans are so important, is when you go and have a look at the surveys that are done of organisations that have RAPs and those that don't. Organisations that have reconciliation action plans, the people in those organisations change their attitudes. Not all of them, but a lot of them. They get exposed to new ideas, they get exposed to information, and it shifts their attitudes towards relationships, towards reconciliation, and it gets them more engaged. I saw this firsthand when I was on the board of Woodside, and I saw the organisation lean in and actually embrace their reconciliation action plan and how it changed the culture of the organisation more broadly. As a board member, I'd watched them try to deal with gender diversity and not have tremendous success, quite honestly. And then they took the reconciliation action plan seriously, and I saw them admit to things that they didn't know and they didn't understand and they needed to learn. And they built a more inclusive environment around that. And not surprisingly, not soon after, you started to see improvement in their gender diversity outcomes as well. If you do it well, you change culture and you change hearts and minds. So I don't think reconciliation action plans are perfect. I certainly saw fantastic ones when I was at RA, and I certainly saw some that probably weren't that fantastic. But they are a way to engage and a way to lift expectations and a way to lift performance. And rather than arguing for their end, I would actually encourage constructive feedback on how they can be used better and further strengthened. The third point I wanted to make is that, again, this is going to be an obvious one, but we need truth-telling more than ever in this country. And this is probably my greatest area of learning. I am an economist by training. I have a sneaky psychology degree, which maybe makes me a little bit different. But the tools of my trade are very much in the economics framework. And I can tell you when I first started engaging in reconciliation, I was a heck of a lot more comfortable talking about employment targets and how we did that better and procurement and all of these other things. And then I quickly learned that actually at the heart of it all was human rights. And if we don't tell the stories, if we don't build understanding, if we don't respect human rights and we don't take that seriously, then all of the other stuff is very unlikely to be sustainable. So I found myself delving into that in ways that quite honestly made me pretty uncomfortable. But people have helped me along the way and told me when I was an idiot, actually, and been very patient and kind in helping me to learn what I needed to learn. We'd use the word reconciliation and people sort of want to say, what does it mean? It means many things, etc. It's about a relationship. That's what's at its heart, is just the relationships that we build. And we all know that you only have strong relationships on the basis of shared understanding and mutual respect. The only way that I think we can get to that shared understanding and mutual respect is if we have an honest conversation about the impact of colonisation, what it's meant, how it's felt. And we need to have that respectfully, of course, and carefully. But we really do, as a nation, need to get to a better shared understanding of that. I feel if we don't get that honest view of our history, if we don't understand how it has shaped and impacted everything that we know today, then the racism, the systemic racism, and everything else that's happened as a result of colonisation is simply going to continue to shape our future in a way that we don't want it to and we shouldn't allow it to. At CEDA, we're doing a lot of work at the moment on what sort of future we want to see, and one of the key things that we're reminding people is that our social compact as a nation really matters. It's really hard to talk about the social compact and talk about things like not leaving people behind and not reflect on where we are with reconciliation. We know that there was tremendous goodwill and support for the intention of the voice, but the referendum revealed a significant lack of understanding about the impact of colonisation, and this vacuum created an environment in which too many people were able to sow seeds of doubt, confusion and racism. Unless we address this, the story of reconciliation will continue to be one of requiring heroic efforts and relying on opportunism. And for me, that is not a sustainable approach in the face of so much that is still to be done. And my final point is that we actually need to invest more in reconciliation. In my time on the board at RA, the only increase in funding that we received, and I was on the board for 14 years, the only increase in funding that we had was an indexation to our funding that was delivered in my last year on the board. And otherwise, for 14 years, we did the work of reconciliation on the same budget, notwithstanding the growth in reconciliation action plans and notwithstanding rightly increasing expectations on our work and our impact. If we're going to get serious about truth-telling, we need to see a serious investment to ensure that we build a shared understanding about what it means for Indigenous and non-Indigenous people alike. We need to build the tools, the processes, the protocols to ensure that it is culturally safe and informed, and that the processes and engagements are not one-off. This is not just a call for more money for Reconciliation Australia. This is not RA's agenda alone. They have a role to play, but this is a broader point that I'm making. And can I make this point really, really clearly? This is not investment in reconciliation that comes at the expense of any other funding for First Nations communities, programs or people. This is about funding for the whole nation. It should be funded as such. It shouldn't be money that's coming out of First Nations budgets. It needs to be acknowledged as a nation-building investment, and I think that's how it should be seen by government. I promise now that I'm about to close off, and you can subject me to whatever questions you like. But can I finish with this? Too often conversations about reconciliation become conversations about policies, politics and power. Yet at the end of the day, I hope the message that you've heard from me is that reconciliation is about people, their lives and humanity. It is about empathy, it is about suspending judgment, rather than looking at someone and blaming them for the impact of systemic racism and disempowerment. It is about recognising the strength and resilience that resides in so many of our First Nations people and communities, and seeking to enable rather than to destroy that. If you can see this, responsibility falls to you and to us to carry that change beyond the rooms and venues such as this that are filled with friends and like-minded people, but actually to a broader audience. And I think the one thing that I would reflect on from my time at Reconciliation Australia is that we haven't done that well enough. It's a big ask, it's probably a bit unfair, but that is the big challenge before us. Not always doing what's easy, not always doing what's comfortable, but quite the contrary. Leaning in and having the more difficult conversations and trying to find ways to connect to people that haven't got themselves to where we are at this moment. It's not comfortable, it's not easy, but as a non-Indigenous person, I think it's absolutely the least that we can do. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Melinda. I found that quite riveting. I want to take a couple of things out of that. And my sort of take out is that what we do is hard work. And I think my team and those people within my division have probably experienced what that hard work's been like over the last 6 months. So I want to thank you for that. It's a good reminder. I think it is about investment in nation building and where we go as a country in the future. I think one of the good things, not one of the good things, but one of the things that Swinburne's very proud of is we're a very practical, pragmatic organisation, and we don't sit within the esoteric world of reconciliation, and we want to be part of on-the-ground change. So I think that's the pledge I think our Vice-Chancellor and myself and the Chancellor would advocate for in the future. So I want to thank you for making us realise that we have a role to play in this. Now is the chance for those in the audience who would like to ask Melinda some questions. Oh, can't hold them back now, Melinda. You've opened the floodgates. I don't see this very often when we have these. People, hands went up straight away. So I think we'll start with John first because he's the boss.
Melinda, thank you for your very wise reflections. I just want to kind of talk about this issue of racism, because we certainly saw a big step up around the referendum. But something I think that all universities need to give a little bit of consideration to is structural racism, so where people are forced to conform in order to succeed. How do you think we should be thinking about that challenge, and any advice that you've had from your experience around how to identify that and deal with it in the moment?
So I'm going to start with a very personal sort of anecdote, because I think sometimes these things can feel quite distant, and we all know the examples, but we sort of think we don't see them, or quite honestly that we don't contribute to them. I've got a colleague, someone I've worked with on various different forums, Aboriginal man, academic at university I won't name, who describes what it's like when trying to enter a building where as he's going to enter into a door that someone else has walked through, and how there's white people, honestly, stop and look at him and then check to see where his pass is, because it just visually doesn't belong there, right? And that's just the thin edge. So my first challenge to all of us is ask yourself if you've ever done that. Ask yourself if you have ever done that. Just for a second, like, that's where we have to all start. I think, if you think about universities, even Swinburne, they're elite places. They're elite places. We have to think about what it feels like to come into them, and really think about creating a genuinely inclusive environment, which isn't about trying to understand it from your perspective. It's trying to understand it from the experience of whether it's an academic, a researcher, or a student, trying to understand how they feel in that place and make it welcoming. There are some things, I've talked to a bunch of people, and having artwork and displays of things that show that you're at least, aware, and you're turning your minds to it. These things, it can sound trivial, but they're important. But more fundamentally, I think as individuals, we really need to ask ourselves, what are the little barriers that we put up, and start there. The final thing I'd say is that John knows this. I was at an event where someone from a university said, we don't have a problem with racism on our campus. And my response was really like, what, so you're not in Australia? Of course you do. Of course there's racism. There's racism on this campus, and so I think it's incumbent upon everyone who's here to actually figure out how they deal with it. And, I said call it out, but it doesn't mean you have to be aggressive about it. But we can't rely on the victims of racism to be the ones who have to raise it all the time. We've got to be paying attention.
Melinda, thank you for that. It was a bit of an emotional journey, really, because I've had a really great connection, having been in Canberra for 24 years, to wonderful Tom Kalmer. So Tom, when he came back from Vietnam, asked me to have a lunch, and we've been dear friends ever since. And I've been a strong advocate as an Aboriginal person, so I'm an Aboriginal man myself, had Deputy Vice-Chancellor role at University of Canberra when he was the Chancellor. Can I just say, having an Aboriginal Chancellor makes the world so much easier as a PVC Indigenous. There's no doubt about that. Just reflect on my time, and the opportunities that brings is incredible. I just want to touch base on two things. One is the journey of reconciliation that you've been on. So I want to ask you two questions. You've actually know Tom very well, great sort of advocate for reconciliation, but also an incredible gentleman, right? And probably Governor General material overall. But what do you think is the most important aspect of reconciliation, and how could we deliver that from an economics perspective?
Oh, gosh. Well, I think, all right, the most important thing I think is the relationship. That's what I've come to sort of understand is, and if I think about this, from an employment perspective, I saw lots of really well-intentioned people building out employment plans for their organisations, and with really massive commitments to people they were going to bring on board and all the rest of it. And And they would be surprised at how hard it was, and they would do a really good job of recruiting people, but then would have problems with retention and all these other sorts of things. And it's because they hadn't invested the time to really understand what a truly inclusive workplace looked like, and even more fundamentally, how you actually sat back and thought, what can I learn from this experience? How can I change for the benefit of my organisation and my people? It's that really opening up. And, I think there's lots of fantastic practical things I can point to, but the really exciting piece for reconciliation for me is when you get to a place where, I'm sorry, I will become an economist, but 1 + 1 = 3. Because we actually all open up to sort of understand and to really learn about what we can learn from First Nations history and culture and connection to community and all these things, and how you bring it together with where we are now and actually create something that you never imagined. And so when you look at some of these practical sort of examples of sort of thinking about, well, how do I bring Indigenous knowledge and help that to solve problems and whatever else, that's the exciting stuff. But you're never going to get there unless you actually get to a place where there is that mutual respect. So that's probably the thing, that I learned. I could go, my happy place, my easy place is programs and employment and economic empowerment and whatever. My uncomfortable but growth space is actually that.
And I've got a second question, if you can't, John. Sorry. I'm indulging here just a little bit because I'm really fascinated because I had a great academic career, 20 years in universities, Deputy Vice Chancellor, and I thought I'd part ways with the universities. I was asked to join the Victorian Chamber of Commerce and Industry Board, and I'm also, committee chair as well, one of the committees. First Aboriginal person to do so. Great connection with the president, Adrian Clowden. My question, I suppose, this second question is, from your perspective, I mean, you've actually had a stellar career yourself. What advice would you give to organisations to pursue economic empowerment of Aboriginal communities? And you live in Victoria. We're about to have the first treaty, and we're about to have a statewide treaty. So what role do you think business could play in the treaty process?
Man, no pulling punches here. Let me make it one observation first, and then I'll come back to that, to the actual question. One of the things, and I meant to say this when I had too many ideas and I lost my track because I kept writing notes next down, so I apologise for that. But one of the things that really, it was a real learning for me was when I was at the Business Council of Australia, as I said, business wasn't as vocal or as demonstrable. They were, the mining companies fine, but business broadly. And I was really struck by how important a role business could play, really important, and really important by just standing up and actually saying it was important and then showing it, right? So I sat there and watched Richard Goyder, who was then the CEO of Wesfarmers, stand up and talk from the heart about his experience growing up in WA and why reconciliation mattered and whatever else. Now, honestly, bang, that was so much more transformative than anyone who was the CEO of Reconciliation Australia or whatever, because they were the usual suspects. So part of my sort of, cry for please get more is the unusual suspects saying this matters is so important. It's so important because it changes the conversation, it changes the narrative. So business needs to get involved, business needs to be less afraid, and business needs to stop thinking about all of the risks and focus on the opportunity. That's my sort of simple message.
And there's Michelle. I think Michelle had a question. Is that right, Michelle?
question.
Okay. You can start with Michelle and we can work out who the other one is.
You can go first. Yeah. Just simple question. What you said that there were some organisations that did really well in these plans and there were some organisations that didn't do so well. What were the factors that helped them to do well and what were the factors that limited them?
Honestly, the ones who really embrace it and really understand that you've got to build your knowledge and start from basics and really learn what you don't know, and who really approach it from the perspective of not knowing what they don't know and just being open and actually taking a bit of a risk. I was really surprised watching CEOs of multi-billion-dollar companies who were afraid to give an acknowledgement of country. They were just hesitant. They were uncomfortable. They're used to being masters of their universe, and all of a sudden they're sort of in this place they're not expert. The ones who embraced that and really lent into that, right, 100%. The ones who properly resourced it and properly resourced things with their best people and really committed to that, and the ones who adopted a dynamic approach to being ambitious but then understanding that they had to keep looking at what was going on and change and change and change, and changing a commitment or an approach wasn't failure. They did really, really well. The ones who didn't properly resource it, the ones who didn't take the time to understand how big this was, and, you know, honestly, the ones who wanted to look good for other reasons, like, they fall away. Now, that's not great, right? And, you know, you don't want to diminish what everyone else is doing. But at the same time, I'm a bit of a believer that pull people in, get them engaged, and then bring them up the curve, and then sort of, you know, hold them to account. RA's went through its own journey. We had a RAP plan, and then we had the different tiers, which was about trying to get people to elevate and not just stand still and be more ambitious. That is not a perfect kind of outcome, if you like. That organisation hasn't perfectly nailed that, but it is really trying to drive and build that momentum. And a really important part of building credibility has been holding people to account when they have made mistakes. Now, Rio, I mean, honestly, but they were out, you know, pretty quickly, and they were not easy conversations, and they were conversations I was in, and they were not easy, but we wouldn't have had any credibility. And honestly, I would have had people leaving the board if we hadn't done that, because honestly, hold the mirror up. But there've been a lot on the way through, and one of the challenges for RA has been seeing more feedback come in and more complaints, and how you actually manage that.
Firstly, I'd like to actually say MTC do an amazing job, and it was awesome to hear the stats. So I think we actually should give them all of a round of applause first. Because without them, I don't think that we would have such a success rate. I know that they helped me through a lot of things, and my daughter's currently a student here at Swinburne. So very proud to actually have her have a safe space. So the work that they do is really good. I'd like to acknowledge also that your deep sharing today. Thank you so much for that, and sharing around your experiences. I do want to say, though, reconciliation is not the job of First Nations people to be leading. It puts a really big colonial load on us. And, you know, we continue to ask to bleed our hearts. And, you know, how many reports have to be done around truth telling to actually see this? But I also wanted to ask, as a First Nation community member myself, how do we break down the barriers and tell our truth when individuals or organisations aren't standing in line with their RAP? So they're saying what they're going to do, but, you know, they're doing the black cladding, or they're getting staff in, but really it's a ticker box.
Yeah, so hopefully, you know, we continue to actually shine a light on that, and actually continue to sort of lift the standard and make sure that the transparency and the accountability of the RAP program actually exposes that. I'm not going to pretend that it's right every time, but the more we expect of RAPs and the more we look to understand them, then I think the more that you know, blackwashing, blackcladding, however you want to describe it, gets exposed. I absolutely hear you 100% in terms of how many times do you have to tell your story. And can I just say, I just, you know, quite frankly, gobsmacked and blown away by how many people are prepared to just keep sharing to help people like me understand. And when I say I feel a debt of gratitude, I really do, and I feel I've got a responsibility for that, to actually honour that and to keep sort of doing what I can do. I do think we have to have a formal process, though, because we've got to find a way to actually do that. You know, it's not going to be a one and done. We have to find a way to do this constructively so that is heard, and it's heard systematically in a way that is going to get us to a better place, so that at least it's worth it, right? And I don't think that's easy. To your starting point, that I think that's really the key message I wanted to deliver, is that 97% of this population has to pull its socks up and get in there. I think it's not easy. Like, I'm not saying it is, and one of the hard things I think is that you You're worried about not wanting to be seen to be speaking on behalf of First Nations people, not want to be seen to be driving the agenda. But I'm not saying that. I'm just saying I think we have to explain why it's important to us. We have to explain what we've seen and why we don't think that is great. And we have to just start leaning in and demonstrably showing respect and not just pretending. For me to sort of talk in this audience, great. The harder thing is to go and stand in a different audience and own an acknowledgement of country and really challenge people. And that's one of the things I've been trying to do, is that the more people want to say no acknowledgements, the longer I speak. So, I mean, it's not. We should all do that.
Thanks, Megan Utter. In some ways, my question isn't really a question, it's more of a challenge, and it follows on from that last comment. Listening to you, I heard you say that key element of reconciliation is about relationships. Relationships at their heart are fundamentally about storytelling. You mentioned being a 12-year-old coming to this country, not learning much about our history. My challenge to you is, do you think that we're actually intellectually mature enough as a country, if we understand the processes of writing history, excavating history, having those truth-telling conversations, are we at a point where we can actually do that in a way that is driven by curiosity and a desire for healing? Or is it going to descend into, sort of contestation and claiming the narrative?
That is a really good question. And I guess I think that my point about the investments in the process and the protocols and building the foundations to get to the right place is going to take time. And I think that a lot of that groundwork has to be done by non-Indigenous Australians, because it would be, I think, unfair and unreasonable to not do the work and then to initiate another process of asking people to share their stories, to be vulnerable, to share their hurt and their pain and everything else, and anger and frustration, for it not to be constructive. So I take that very seriously, but I think it's a big part of my message is I think non-Indigenous Australia has to start talking about why it matters and be a part of laying the foundations for that, not the foundations for what those stories are, but we've got to try to make sure that they're heard. And there is a big chunk of work that has to be done. And if you look at even just the basic understanding of civics in this country, of civic engagement, I don't underestimate the challenge, but we also have to start talking about how do we get to a better place in all these conversations. And it's a big part of when we're sort of talking at CEDA about social compact. We've allowed the social compact to fray. We've allowed false narratives to be put that have been corrosive to our ability as a community to do exactly what you've spoken about. And so we've got to lean into that, and we've got to start challenging, if you said to people, what is a social compact in Australia? I think fair go, we don't leave people behind. We leave people behind all the time. And we've allowed a narrative to be created that actually blames them for it, which is just wrong. And so I'm an old fart, so I've got to start getting serious about this and being a bit braver, and that's what I'm trying to do. But I'm trying to encourage a few other people to join me on the journey there, and to take a bit of heat on the way through, because honestly, all my Indigenous colleagues have done enough of that.
I suppose, Melinda, my question is reflecting from what you've learned on your journey of reconciliation, and often reconciliation is characterised as white fellas business, but I suppose it takes two to tango. So I guess reflecting on what you've learned and what you know, and particularly I liked your comment about it's easy to talk to, when you said you were talking to a room of like-minded people, talking to those who are disengaged or ambivalent is the hard stuff. My question goes to, so what do I need to do as an Aboriginal person to make reconciliation work? Rather than just say it's for others to do, what do I need to do? Because I think that's something I think we need to ask ourselves as Aboriginal people. I'd be just interested from your experience in RA and that higher picture of the whole movement. what can we contribute?
You know, the simplest thing, I think, Ian, is to give us permission to be a bit bolder as non-Indigenous people to advance the conversation. I think sometimes that's the hard part, is you don't want to be seen to be leading the conversation in a way that doesn't have the endorsement or support of First Nations people. And sometimes, you know, I might not get that right, and I think that's one of the things I've learned. And I feel like I've earned a bit of trust from some of my Indigenous colleagues who are prepared for me to go out and to share stories and to try to push this along, because they know where it's coming from. And I just think maybe there just needs to be a bit more faith in the intent and encouragement, because I think sometimes we're a bit afraid that we're going to say or do the wrong thing.
Failure's okay. I'm an expert at that. Failure's okay, because you'll learn what not to do, and so what's left is what's right to do. So yeah, I just sometimes think that I reflect on what can I add to this rather than what I expect others to do.
Yeah, and I think we all just need to be a bit more forgiving of people who are bringing the right heart to things, and to just see if we can be a bit more empathetic about that.
So lastly, if I jump forward a decade or a generation, what does reconciliation look like for you?
Well, I'd like one of my dearest friend's daughters to feel that she was proud of her Aboriginality, that as a nation we saw it as an absolute sign of strength, that we just had so many success stories and we just thought we were all proud of it, and that the moments when we celebrate now, those moments, that it's everyone at the MCG, that it's everyone enjoying it, and that it's literally just a foundation of our strength, and that, you know, non-Indigenous organisations and people have learned from that, and they've changed as well, and that you can see it kind of everywhere.
Okay, as we draw to the close, I want to thank Melinda for her presentation tonight and her heartfelt reflections on her journey in reconciliation. But I'd also like to big shout out to the staff of the MTC who've done and continue to do a great job in supporting events like this. I'd also like to thank our executive group and our council and our deans for taking on the challenge of delivering Indigenous business action plans. They didn't have to do it, but it was certainly a way that we've encouraged them to implement a reconciled Swinburne. So I want to thank them and their continued commitment. So thank you to everybody in the room for being here. I know it's a cold night. Safe trip home.